Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the World Cup preview here on Celtic Down Under. My name is Laura Bradburn and I am joined by Liam. How you doing?
Good. Looking forward to getting into some African football today. Always an interesting topic.
Absolutely. Speaking of African football, you're wearing quite the shirt there. South Africa 98, which by the way, I did predict off the top of my own head when Liam shared it in the Axom group chat, which I was quite proud of.
Yep, well done.
Yes. I'm a geek.
It's an absolute classic. One of those. Let's just say one of those ones that I sourced through an irregular market, shall we say?
What he means is the official Kappa online store. That's what he means.
Yes. Headquartered in Guangdong province in China. Yeah. Anyway, right.
Anyway, that being said, let's crack on. We've covered Netherlands, we've covered Qatar. The next team in Group A, the third out of 4 that we have to cover in this series, is of course Senegal, the first African team that we're covering at this World Cup. Stars like Sadio Mane, who we'll go on to talk about. Looking at their history though, Liam, a team that I always kind of thought, yeah, it's Senegal, they're always at the World Cup. This is only going to be their third appearance in the finals after that famous 2002 quarter-final run and the group stage exit in Russia in 2018. Does that surprise you that they've not been there more often than that?
Yeah, when you pointed that out to me in our pre-game discussion, that was I was really surprised because they're a team that you think of as always being there. It's, you think of Cameroon, you think of Senegal, and you think of Nigeria. That's your you think of them as the big 3 African teams that are nearly always there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that did surprise me when I thought about it. But they are a team with some phenomenal talent in them this year. So they're definitely there on merit, no question about that.
Speaking of phenomenal talent, I'm just looking at the squad back from that 2002 run at Japan and South Korea, where they got all the way to the quarterfinals in their debut World Cup appearance. Some of those names in that team became, household names through that one appearance. You've obviously got the late great Papa Bouba Diop. You've got El Hadj Diouf, who, listen, we don't like to mention him on these shores, but he did put in quite a performance. Salif Diao is another one. There's a plethora of players there that are remembered 20 years later for that performance. What do you think the chances are of the current day squad maybe not emulating that performance, but becoming household names like that for their country?
Well, I think that there's more than just their country. Pele famously said that he expected an African team to win the World Cup within the next 20 years, but that was, I think, back in the 80s. He said that.
More than 20 years ago.
Aye, so it's not quite happened yet, but you do see, I think. And I see a similar thing in Asian football, to be honest. You see a gradual improvement with every World Cup that comes round. And this Senegal team, with some of the already established stars in the team, like Mane, who we've already mentioned, they are of the same vintage as Cameroon 1990, Senegal 2002, Ghana 2014. That's the kind of that is the kind of pedigree that we're looking at here.
Yeah.
And Senegal have got that to live up to.
They have got that to live up to. Sadio Mane, along with some of the more common names you might have heard of, like Ismaila Sarr, obviously, and Kalidou Koulibaly, who's now at Chelsea, previously of Napoli. They have made a previous appearance at a World Cup for Senegal in Group H, along with Colombia, Liam's country of residence, Japan, and Poland at Russia in 2018, but did not make it out of the group stage, of course. Bearing in mind that, quite a lot of those star players are of an age that they will probably still be representing the team at this World Cup, was that performance by them in 2018 a shock to you, considering some might suggest that group that included Poland, Japan, and Colombia might have been one you would expect Senegal to get out of.
Well, the thing is, I mean, as I mentioned on previous episodes when we were talking about the Dutch team, every World Cup there are big teams that flop and there are small teams that produce surprises.
Mm-hmm.
And at 2018, Japan was one of the perceived smaller teams that caused an upset. Basically, they beat Colombia in the first game, and it turned that group upside down because Colombia were expected to win that group, and Senegal were expected to get second. And then the way the results just went, it didn't fall right for Senegal, and I think that was very unfortunate. But it was just the way football goes. On a different day, if I remember correctly, they drew 2 each with Japan, but it could easily have been like 5 or 6-2 to either team because both teams really went for it.
Yeah.
They were unlucky in their other games. I think that was perhaps a team that was maybe just a wee bit too young at that point. Because, like you say, most of those players are still here now in the squad. So 4 years on, a wee bit more seasoned, I think they could. And I do think they have an easier group now than they did in 2018. So that goes in their favour as well.
Yeah, just for clarification, they are in Group A, obviously, with Qatar and Netherlands, who we've also covered, and Ecuador, who we're going to get onto in the next episode. Some might say that they are coming into the World Cup on the back of a good run of form. They are, of course, the current Africa Cup of Nations champions, having secured that in Cameroon in 2021. What kind of stead do you think that puts them in for going into this World Cup? Does it mean very much, if anything at all, or is it going to be a case of a completely different kettle of fish with the World Cup?
I mean, winning any international tournament, especially your continental championship, is going to be a morale booster for any team. So that's going to give them some confidence going into the tournament. But at the end of the day, Qatar are in the same group as them, and they're the Asian champions. That's an interesting kind of a subtext to this group that no one's talked about. The fact that the champions of Asia are going to face the champions of Africa in the first round. That is quite an intriguing prospect from the sort of global football perspective, because everybody thinks about the European and the South American teams, but there's 2 teams from the quote-unquote emerging regions of world football who are both going to have a point to prove, and I think that is going to be a fascinating game.
They will have a point to prove, and that will be a fascinating game. It won't, of course, be the opening game for Senegal, who are playing Netherlands, as we touched on in the previous show. A must win for Netherlands, or a must not lose for Netherlands, as you said in the last show. I take it it's the same for Senegal, really. Regardless of who your opposition is in that opening match, you've really got to go for it, I think.
Yeah, I think both teams will just, they're thinking, right, if we win this, we've got 1 foot in the second round, because they would both fancy chances to beat at least one of Qatar or Ecuador. All due respect to those teams, but most people would say that Senegal and the Netherlands are a cut above both of them.
Yeah.
But as I said before, we're taking a risk in underestimating Qatar. Ecuador, maybe not so much, but Qatar could produce a few shocks. And Senegal will need to be wary, because if Qatar claim a scalp, that's likely to be the one they'll take.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing to view anyway. Senegal, in terms of current players, Sadio Mane, we've got to start with him. He's obviously, the star man, won everything there was to win at Liverpool, is now at Bayern Munich, showing exactly why he was one of the most coveted names in Europe for a number of years. Liverpool, in a lot of ways, are suffering more for his loss than I think they expected to. How much of an impact can he have, given that, without disrespecting the Senegal team too much, you would imagine that most of their hopes are going to lie on his back and exactly how well he performs at this tournament?
I think, given his current form, the current structure of the Senegal team, and his standing in European football, Mane is to Senegal what Cristiano Ronaldo is to Portugal. Whether or not they have a successful World Cup is going to depend hugely on how successful a World Cup he has as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and sometimes you can find yourself feeling a little bit ignorant, assuming that the European-based players for the African nations will be the ones that carry the most responsibility for how far they get. But in my opinion, there's no point in denying that European football is the highest level of football that there is. And so any player from any continent who manages to make it in that arena is going to, by default, almost be the strongest in their national team, just through the fact that they've reached the pinnacle of club football. Is that an unfair thing to say, given that you obviously reside outside of Europe and probably take in a lot more football outside of Europe than I do?
I wouldn't say it's an unfair thing. I think at the moment that is the pragmatic view. But what I would say is that now I can't speak too much to Africa because I do not have that much experience of African football, because it's not something you see on TV over here very much. But from what I have read and what I'm led to believe, there are moves to really try and develop the game there in the same way that about 20 years ago there were huge moves to develop the J League and the K League and the Australian A League. And all those countries are now reaping the benefits of that. So if a similar move takes hold in Africa, I mean, the African Champions League has been up and running for a while now, and that's, I'd say it's about on a par with the Asian Champions League in terms of competitiveness. So that's already a huge step forward, considering that Africa does not have anything like the infrastructure that a lot of Asian countries have.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Just looking at the fixtures, obviously we've talked about the fact that they come up against Netherlands first and foremost. Their second match on the 25th of November is Qatar, followed by Ecuador on the 29th of November. Does that sequence of matches for Senegal change how you think they might do in the group? Because I do think, although it shouldn't factor in, if they don't get points off of Netherlands, it can. I sometimes think that coming out of that first game in the group stage of the World Cup with 0 points can be psychologically a very difficult thing to get over, even if on paper you're following matches you would expect to hopefully get 6 points from, I would say.
I think, assuming that the form guide goes true and they lose to Netherlands in the opening game, as long as it's not an absolute kicking, I think they will bounce back from it. It's a bit like if you think about the Champions League this season. Just to use an example, we're Celtic fans. Celtic lost 3-0 to Real Madrid, but took a great deal of encouragement and heart from how good a performance they put in. Conversely, Rangers get systematically taken apart in every game they've played. And you can see, going the other way, the negative mental impact that has had on them in their league form.
Yeah.
So I think with Senegal, in a much more kind of a compressed idea, because it's only 3 games, but by the same token, a narrow defeat against the Netherlands is going to make them think, right, well, we've shown we can compete at this level, so let's go out and beat these other 2 teams that we should beat. Or if they get absolutely murdered by them, like 4 or 5-0, it's going to be like, oh God, we didn't turn up, and if we don't turn up again, we're out. That's the kind of the way that the first game can really swing either way.
It's I always think that's the case, even when you get 2 strong teams against each other, as Senegal and Netherlands are in this group. There are other groups that we'll go on to review. But very often, I think when the two strong teams come up against each other in the first match, it's almost, as important a match as there is at the whole tournament, because a loss for one of those strong teams straight out the gate has such a massive impact on them for the rest of the tournament, however long or short that it is. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out the victor in that first match, because I think it's going to inform a lot of the rest of the group. Now, sorry, you were going to say something there.
I was just going to say there, yeah, I mean, Senegal themselves are an example of that. If you look back to 2002, they beat France in the opening game, and France ended up getting knocked out early.
Exactly.
They will be probably more aware than most of the dangers that losing that first game can pose,
Yeah, I think it's always a case of, and I always think this with games in hand as well in a league system. Games in hand are all very well and good, but points on the board is what matters. And in this case as well, if Senegal lose to the Netherlands, it's all very well and good saying, yeah, but we should beat the other two. The fact is that they could come out of that first game. Let's assume, as we suggested might happen, Qatar win against Ecuador and Netherlands beat Senegal. You're in a situation there where both Qatar and Netherlands are 3 points ahead of Senegal before they even get a chance to kick another ball, and psychologically that's just massive.
Aye, and then suddenly that Asian African champion showdown we talked about becomes a probable shootout for second place in the group.
Yeah, it's going to be. Do you know this is where talking about this stuff really gets me excited, because a group that on paper I, as a Scottish person, shouldn't have a huge amount of interest in, suddenly has all these narratives and underlying things. That thing you've pointed out about the Asian champions versus the African champions is going to be a massive thing for that group. And it's just going to make watching Qatar versus Senegal, which on paper isn't the most glamorous of ties at this World Cup, mean so much more.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing I actually love about the World Cup, is teams like Senegal, like Qatar, that I normally would go 3 or 4 years without even hearing about them, because in European football, we just never talk about teams outside of Europe. And that's a kind of an ingrained prejudice, I suppose, that we just, like you say, because all the best paid and the best team infrastructure is in Europe, we just kind of focus our attention there, when there is a lot of good football to be watched in other countries as well. But come back to Senegal, they are, I think, Africa's best hope for this World Cup. And they are, not only are they, I think, the best African team at this World Cup, but I think they're also the ones potentially best placed to go somewhere in the tournament. In terms of getting out of the group and going on from there. But as I've already said with my other predictions, I think they might struggle in this group. But on paper, they shouldn't. So we'll have to wait and see.
If you want to see Liam's other predictions, then obviously go back and watch the two previews we've done so far for Netherlands and for Qatar. You'll get an idea of where his thoughts are for those two teams. But let's assume you haven't made those predictions and Senegal managed to get out of the group.
Yeah.
Where do their chances lie beyond that? Is it because I sometimes wonder with the last 16 of a World Cup, with it being straight knockouts, anything can happen, really, can't it?
Aye, and knockout games tend to favour more attacking teams, the teams that go for it. You know, again, look back to the example of like Cameroon in 1990. You know, they powered their way to the quarterfinals and came within minutes of knocking out England, who were, arguably the second best team at that tournament. So yeah, the precedent is there.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, we have one more team to cover in this group, which is Ecuador. Be sure to tune in for that when it goes live. This video will be part of a playlist, I'm sure, where we cover all 32 teams. So make sure and go back and watch the other ones that we've got so far. We'll see what happens. The countdown to the World Cup is on, and we are ever closer to it. Liam, thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you for the next one and a preview of Ecuador.
See you then.